Hello and shalom. I'm Steve Crane. Thanks for joining me. The title of today's conversation, the book it represents, and the play which is in development is When Bible Meets History. Ancient Voices Tell Their Version. I'd like to tell you that in this modern era of questioning most traditional knowledge, including the narrative in Torah, it just seems appropriate now, doesn't it, to give the actual biblical people who are written about a chance to tell us about their own experiences. You're going to certainly be surprised when you hear what they have to say, and amazed to understand how, I would say in a measured way, their words support Torah. Why don't we start with the person who took a chance and brought us knowledge? Eve.
Hi, I'm Eve. Yes, from the Garden of Eden. I am the mother of humanity. Yes, of all of you. I am also the mother of knowledge, having partaken from the tree of knowledge, eating that apple so that all you may rise above the status of animals. In doing so, I became perhaps the most misunderstood and misrepresented of influential people. Even though I didn't obey God, nowhere does Torah attribute sin to me, but shows me as the first human to utter language, the first given a name, and a wisdom figure who wanted knowledge, hence tasting fruit from the forbidden tree. Knowledge, I thought, would be for the good of all. Then I was distressed to realize that humans would use knowledge to enslave others, amass personal power, and commit abominations. I read Torah, and I saw in it something to give me hope, the laws of Abraham and Moses. But are the stories really true? Who can believe the stories in Torah? Can you? Is there actual proof they took place? This troubled me until I saw many millennia later, Steve Crane had the same questions and sought answers. Let's hear what he discovered.
Hope you enjoyed Eve's comments. She includes a bit of Hebrew common sense. You know, not everyone gets an introduction from the first person to seek knowledge, but it happens to be appropriate because a particular kind of knowledge is what we are looking for in this conversation. And what is that knowledge? We are here to talk about the historic truth in Torah. And guys, what a subject! Let me start by asking a couple of questions. First, do you attend a Bible study or read Torah with some regularity? Second, would you describe Torah as an accurate history? Maybe a completely fictional myth? Or maybe something else? Well, it just so happens that the subject of biblical historicity has consumed me for some time, years, and the results are in my book. Now, I know and you know that there is no consensus on this subject, not among experts, not among interested readers, and certainly not among people on the street. The unfortunate news from this is that some people have distanced themselves from religion due to a perception that Torah is at best an historic novel. Now let me cut to the chase. Multiple archaeological studies and simple logic show that events described in Torah did happen. Those same studies show that Torah describes events in a literary style best understood in a time frame of 3,000 years ago. To help you adjust your sense of time frame, just think of Shakespeare. He lived a measly 400 years ago. If he is hard to understand without a study guide, try a mindset all the way back in the era of Moses. In addition, realize that purposes in the books of Moses are multifunctional, including education, religion, and moral standards, all presented with a seasoning of metaphor and poetry. With that mix, you have Torah, but you do not have an academic history. So let's let ancient voices tell their version of actual history. Voices that are available to us by writing on stone and papyrus. The first ancient voice you'll hear from is Pharaoh Amenemhat I, the founding pharaoh of the 12th dynasty. He was installed after a civil war where he was helped by Hebrew warriors. That's right, I'll say it again. Hebrew warriors helped install the 12th dynasty of Egypt. How do we know? Because Amenemhat is quoted on Egyptian papyrus and monuments. Also, because there are stone etchings in the Egyptian desert about troops and a Hebrew general. That's simple logic. The presence of Hebrew writing describing a Hebrew general with his troops means the presence of Hebrews. Yes, Hebrews were in Egypt 4,000 years ago. In addition, we know of Amenemhat's Hebrew connection because of a statue in his advisor's tomb. And that statue is very likely Sarah. Yes, our Sarah, wife of Abraham. Or if not, a Hebrew woman of high standing. Why don't we look in on the ancient voice of Amenemhat himself, the pharaoh who led Hebrews into Egypt in large numbers?
Scribe, come quickly. There is work to be done. Be prepared to write on papyrus and etch in stone.
Yes, great conquering Pharaoh Amenemhat.
Scribe, let's get down to business. I have won the war and am now the founder of the 12th dynasty. Let it be written in stone and papyrus how I became pharaoh. It is I who acted as a fortress without allies except for Nubians and Hebrews. Upper and Lower Egypt were against me. Engrave that and display it for the ages.
Yes, great Pharaoh.
Next, issue orders on papyrus. Canaanites are not to be allowed past my frontier wall into Egypt. Hebrews, on the other hand, will be escorted into Egypt. See to it that my deputy's tomb depicts a scene of the Hebrews entering with one of their leaders, say, Abishai.
Only Hebrews, not Canaanites?
That's right. Issue curses for the Canaanites, for they have challenged me. Make clay images of them, then crush the images. Then I wish for a statue of the Hebrew emissary Sarah to be made. It can be bequeathed to my trusted aide and put in his tomb, so that one day it will end up in the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
It shall be done.
I have much in common with Hebrews. I am a commoner who rose my way through the ranks until my chance for power and change came. Hebrews also accept commoners and even escaped slaves into their ranks. They came to my aid against the rebel aristocrats. So, I am giving them rights to settle in the Nile Delta area.
Hebrew troops have etched phrases in desert rocks using the Hebrew language rather than hieroglyphics. Shall we allow that to continue?
Of course. They are allies. Those rocks will prove early Hebrew presence in Egypt. Have my orders carried out promptly. The defeated nobles and priests wish to regain power. They curse me. They curse my allies like the Hebrews. They talk of assassination. I wish for my orders to survive and to inspire my son when he takes the throne.
There we have it, the time when Hebrews were first welcomed into Egypt, when others were not. And that was 4,000 years ago with the installation of the 12th dynasty. Amenemhat was indeed assassinated. It was a tumultuous time. But his son was able to secure the throne, and a golden age of Egyptian-Hebrew relations began. At that time, the concept of a Hebrew people was rather amorphous. Let's face it, neither Abraham nor Isaac built a coalition, let alone a nation. Transforming bickering tribes into a nation, the nation of Israel, was the job of Jacob, and that was quite a political achievement. What's that? Jacob as a politician? I'll bet you thought that the tribes came from the biological sons of Jacob. Am I right? I suggest that you think of Jacob as the father of Israel in the same way that George Washington is the father of the U.S. and Gandhi is the father of India. The tribes of Israel were in existence before Jacob was born, but they were separate and bickering and pagan. There are ample records of the activities of these tribes, but especially one tribe, the Bnei Yamin, sons of the right, which would be to the right on the Euphrates River. They were a fierce tribe that worshipped the moon. Of course, Bnei Yamin condenses into Benjamin or Benjamin. Now, the Bnei Yamin fought against the Bnei Smolah, or sons of the left of the Euphrates, for the control of an important city on that river. The Smolah eventually were victorious and took over control of the city from the Yamin. Nasty business. Joseph would come from the Smolah. So now, if all of this is making your head spin, hold on. Let's just take a breath. This is just the short version. Bear in mind, this research is valuable for Torah because it validates Torah. In order to reconcile Torah language with a chronology of history, it needs some interpretation. That is what is done in my book. With that in mind, we can turn our attention to one of the longest stories in Torah, Joseph. Joseph deserves the spotlight because he cemented the relationship of Hebrews in Egypt with his tremendous contributions. Statues of Joseph and his sons have been discovered, with Joseph shown, as you will soon see. With regard to his time in Egypt, we have read in Torah about Potiphar, the Egyptian official who initially took charge of Joseph. From Potiphar's identification on a desert inscription, we know him to be, and I quote, the master of the double cabinet, chief of the treasury, triumphant born of Yatta. Joseph leveraged this and other connections into promotions that ended with his political success. Let's put it this way. Joseph became tightly enmeshed with Egyptian nobility. He did deliver results when he had power, like constructing the Bar Yosef, Canal of Joseph, which is still in use today, still called the Bar Yosef, and still providing a source of food as it has for thousands of years. Honestly, there's so much we don't have time for regarding Joseph, so why don't we flesh out a few other little-known achievements of his and the Hebrews by way of a constructed conversation with a noble woman who probably knew him. Allow me to introduce Lady Synopsisy, probable friend of Joseph.
Welcome, my friend and vizier, Joseph.
Greetings to my friend and supporter, Lady Syneptice. It is always a pleasure to see you.
Why, thank you, Joseph. You know, I wanted you to know something, that I have retained several workers for my estate, including Hebrew weavers and leather craftsmen. The list is in the Brooklyn Museum.
Really? The Brooklyn, whatever you call it? How do you know?
Joseph, did you forget? I had a dream and you interpreted it.
Oh, yeah. I remember. And that's good news, you giving Hebrew immigrants jobs. Remember, they are to be workers, not slaves.
Well, of course. And I also have introduced some Hebrews to my Egyptian friends. I like to see these people mixed together. But Joseph, I have a question for you. What is this new writing that you Hebrews are using? Something called the alphabet. Yeah. What is wrong with our hieroglyphics?
We do use hieroglyphics as well and keep scribes employed. However, with this new system, we use 22 letters in what we call our aleph bet, or alphabet. Using those letters, we can make thousands of words without each word needing its own symbol, as in hieroglyphics. Less memorization, less need for people going like this. Hebrew invention of phonetic alphabet is perhaps the least known aspect of Israelite history. Even uneducated Hebrews can write using this system. Now, tell me, what is to happen when our pharaoh Amenemhat III, my mentor, dies? Hebrews in the north and Egyptians in the south each prefer separate but friendly governments.
Have no concern, Joseph. Plans are complete. A mostly Egyptian group will form the 13th Egyptian dynasty in Thebes with Egyptian pharaohs, and, surprisingly, a mostly Hebrew group will form the 14th Egyptian dynasty in Goshen with Hebrew pharaohs. All of this is written in the list of pharaohs.
Strange as it may seem, you did hear that right. The separation of Egypt into two entities did take place just as you heard. Now the two dynasties, one Egyptian and one Hebrew, did live side by side in peace in Egypt. And yes, the 14th dynasty of Egypt ruled in the Nile Delta area that we know as Goshen with Hebrew pharaohs. You will recognize the Hebrew names from the list that the dynasty has, such as Yakbin and Ya'amu. Unfortunately, the peace was broken after the death of Joseph when Egypt was invaded by a group from Greater Canaan that you may or may not have heard of. They were known as Hyksos. You know, I really do think that both Hebrews and Egyptians did their best to forget and bury the unsavory events of their subjugation. That's understandable. The Hyksos invasion was described in the words of the Jewish historian Josephus, who quoted an Egyptian priest as follows: "They afterwards burnt down our cities and demolished our temples from the gods, and used all the inhabitants after a most barbarous manner. Nay, some they slew and led their children and their wives into slavery." The Hyksos installed one of their own as pharaoh over most of Egypt, while a tiny little rebel Egyptian group held on to a separate dynasty right around that city of Thebes. To free themselves from barbaric Hyksos overlords, Egyptians and Hebrews needed something extraordinary. had to be either from the divine or from a colossal event of nature. And it did come. One of the most mighty volcanic eruptions in history occurred on the Mediterranean island of Santorini, now a Greek tourist spot and idyllic restful place. The eruption, however, disrupted the entire Mediterranean world. The time period was about 1550 BCE, and the event is known by all of us because we know quite a bit about this event. It is known as the plagues, which compromised the military capacity of the Hyksos, so much that the weak Egyptian pharaoh was able to drive out those Hyksos. Many, but not all Hebrews, departed Egypt for Israel. We'll talk more about this later. With that background, let us eavesdrop on a conversation between a scribe and an actual Hebrew governor from Upper Egypt, known to historians. The scene takes place just after the plagues, which both witnessed.
I must write of the violent war of the Hebrew God versus the Hyksos that has left us scrambling. You are a Hebrew governor in Upper Egypt. What do you make of the war?
Scribe, the 10 plagues and the exodus that followed was only the first exodus of Hebrews from Egypt because many Hebrews remained in Egypt, myself included. However, archaeology supports the narrative of a man called Moses and his exodus of remaining slaves centuries later.
How can there possibly be another event as extreme as these plagues we have seen?
Physical evidence and a number of documents suggest that the book of Exodus has combined the exodus of the plagues and the exodus of Moses into one seamless recitation. The exodus of the plagues took place almost 400 years before the Moses exodus.
Really? How can you say that when we've been told otherwise?
Piecing the evidence together, we can conclude that an early exodus of plagues took place in about 1550 BCE, and a later one with Moses happened after 1200 BCE.
Then what can we say about these events we have witnessed?
I will read what Torah says about the plagues that defeated a Hyksos pharaoh.
And I will read what archaeology describes of these same events.
Exodus says, God turned water to blood.
Archaeology says, clouds of ash and red iron ore fell.
Exodus says, frogs covered the land.
Archaeology says, contamination chased out amphibians.
Dust turned to lice.
Polluted water caused infestation.
Flies covered the land.
Just what archaeology says. Without oxygen, fish died, attracting insects.
Livestock suffered severe pestilence.
Same here. Toxins in clouds formed acid, which rained on pasture, killing grass eaters.
Causing boils on man and beast.
It rained acid.
Fire flashed in the midst of hail.
Burning ash fell, and vapor formed above.
Locusts emerged.
So alike. Blocking of the sun caused low temperatures and premature emergence of locusts.
Darkness descended on the land.
Dark clouds blocked the sun.
Death of the firstborn.
Disease, acid, and floods killed children.
Now we have the picture of the first Exodus. I must emphasize that history records Hebrews leaving Egypt for Israel in two separate eras. This does not contradict the Torah narrative, which created one of the most, if not the most, compelling recitations known to humanity. The reason for the compatibility of the books of Moses with the books of archaeology are simple. Torah has folded two events into one history, a common literary technique even in today's world. Hence, the narrative cannot name the Pharaoh of the Exodus because there were two Exoduses and two Pharaohs. Here we have another example that the biblical story has greater priorities than an academic timeline. Now, to understand the story behind the story, we turn our attention to the second Exodus, that of Moses. In doing so, we can attest to the accuracy of the Exodus as told in Torah. Here again, we rely on the writings of scribes, as well as other evidence, to substantiate what we have read. Why don't we just take a look at Miriam talking to one such scribe?
Scribe, you and I were on opposite sides during the war.
Sad to say, but the short dynasty of Pharaoh Ramses enslaved Hebrews and created a situation destined to bring on a horrible war. I wrote against you, but you Hebrews survived long term. And we did not.
Our Moses led Hebrews in that war.
We royal scribes recorded the life of your Moses as he was raised in the royal family as a prince with the Egyptian name Amun-Mese, meaning Moses, born of the god Amun. There are no documents of his parentage. His bust is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
We Hebrews, however, do know who his family was. Our Moses led an uprising of slaves, which unfortunately was unsuccessful. For a second time, we called on God to free us from bondage in Egypt. This second time from an Egyptian pharaoh. Moses escaped, as Torah says, with a mixed multitude. This was the second Exodus, the Moses Exodus. What records do we have of the Moses War? Scribe, you wrote about it.
I will read from my papyrus, now on display in Leiden, the Netherlands.
I will read the Torah account of the same war.
Servants go and plunder, then take what they find.
Exodus, the Lord gave the people favor. They took as they wanted.
Poor men have become owners of wealth.
Exodus, Israel asked Egyptians for jewels of silver and gold.
The wealthy are in mourning. Gates and walls are afire.
Pharaoh's servants said, "Knowest thou not yet that Egypt is destroyed?"
Precious stones are on the necks of female slaves.
Thou shalt make priestly garments of fine cloth and breastplates with jewels.
The Hebrews are skilled in the crafts of the marshlands, and knew when wind and tide would part waters.
Israel camped between Migdol and the sea. Pharaoh overtook them by the sea. Moses told Israel, "You will never see Pharaoh's forces again." And so it was. The revolt covered the tenure of several pharaohs during the short-lived dynasty accented by Ramses II. And let us not forget the usurped tomb made for Moses, Prince of Egypt, which was stolen and occupied by his enemies. As the scribe wrote, the Hebrews lived between the shallow reed seas of the delta for 1,000 years and traversed them when the tides and winds exposed land. As a result, they knew how to time for their crossing, for their escape. The Egyptians lacked that knowledge. As Moses told us, the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. And so it was. The Hebrews made it to safety.
So now you can appreciate that almost 400 years passed between the first and second Exodus. You might be wondering, just what went on in Israel between that first and second Exodus? After all, many Hebrews made their way there after the plagues. Turmoil from other parts of the world no doubt resulted in other immigration as well. This is where Joshua's war fits in. I know that the book of Joshua comes after the Moses Exodus in the Bible. And there is also something else. There is no archaeological or other evidence of the kind of destruction described in the book of Joshua in the time after the Moses Exodus. This is an interesting problem in Israelite history. This is also a problem with many modern people who are offended due to the Torah describing Israelites wiping out a city's population. But bear in mind that the book of Joshua is different from previous books. It is not part of the 5 books of Moses. There is no claim for divine composition of the book of Joshua. That book tells of events that take place outside the developments described in the 5 books of Moses. Authors directed by Hebrew leaders and maybe inspired by God constructed the rest of the Bible. We can suspect that human authors injected some propaganda. That suspicion increases when we read the book after Joshua, Judges. Plain and simple, the book of Judges contradicts many of the claims of wiping out certain populations and admits that Canaanites continued to live with Israelites, but only after their tyrannical overlords were eliminated. Frankly, the narrative of Judges is more in line with evidence at hand. Criticism of Joshua's behavior is unfounded. Very important here, the unsavory aspects described in the book of Joshua did not happen. One thing that did happen during this interval between the 2 Exoduses is that Hebrews continued to maintain strong relationships with Egyptian pharaohs. These pharaohs defeated and pushed out remnants of the Hyksos enemies from the Mediterranean coastline. Then the coast was clear for Israelites to flex their partially developed muscles. Remaining Canaanite tyrants ruling in places like Lachish, Gezer, and Hazor were now vulnerable, and their slaves and serfs saw that. Those slaves and serfs also saw that a new liberating force was present in the area, namely the Israelites. Serfs and Israelites desiring freedom formed alliances that defeated one tyrant after another. In these battles, the story of Deborah rings especially true, and the story of Joshua can be discerned. The Israelite center of operations was the historic city of Shechem, where 4 generations of Hebrew nationalists served as what could be called governors, reporting to the Egyptian pharaoh. What happened is explicitly preserved by a series of over 300 clay letters between both Israelite and Canaanite rulers and Pharaoh. Those letters do mention Joshua in an undefined role. Missing letters might give some more detail. Reading the letters shows battle lines drawn between the rulers of Canaan on one side and the alliance of Hebrews and Canaanite serfs on the other. Now here's just a few excerpts from those letters. From the ruler of Byblos to Pharaoh, My villages are joined to the Epiro, which is an Egyptian name for Hebrews. The entire country will be joined to the Epiro. I am afraid the peasantry will strike me down. Now from the mayor of Jerusalem to Pharaoh. My peasantry long to desert me. Epiro Hebrews have taken the very cities of the king. All is lost. Finally to Pharaoh. Servants joined the Hebrews and smote the king of Lachish. So it is important to note that Israelites did not enter Israel as foreign conquerors and did not slaughter indiscriminately. Rather, the Joshua campaign liberated both peasants and Israelites from the oppression of Canaanite rulers. As explained in the book of Judges, Canaanite people, but not their tyrants, continued to live among Israelites, particularly in places like Gezer and Jerusalem. Once again, we see that events described in Torah have historical reality, and to properly understand them requires reconciliation between the writing style of Torah and modern critical analysis. The Joshua War consolidated much of Israel, mainly in the hill country of Judea and Samaria, that includes Shechem and Hebron. Further consolidation waited for David. Back in Egypt, however, the fascist 19th dynasty, featuring such monsters as Ramesses, grabbed power in a violent coup. Oppression began especially against the Hebrews, but also against others. This was the background for the life of Moses. Now here I am going to add a twist to the story and point out that, as Torah states, Israelites departed Egypt fully armed. Why were they armed? They were armed because they had staged a violent, unsuccessful counter-revolution. Only then did the Moses entourage make its way to Israel after its sojourn in the desert. The new Hebrew nation of Israel was founded on the principles of equality under the law. Later, the new American nation followed the Hebrew model. You know, the Americans followed the Hebrews so closely, we honestly wondered if they communicated somehow. Let's view the American-Israelite connection.
Thomas Jefferson, I heard you were looking for me.
Moses, is that really you? I am such a large fan of you and your teaching. I've used it to help us form our new nation.
Hebrews created a model. It's a shame that Miriam, Aaron, and I never got to visit the promised land of Israel. But we knew that a government for all people would be formed.
Moses, so much of your teaching is still in effect today.
I'm so happy to hear that. Would you like to hear what was to be included in that initial Hebrew form of government? That's in addition to the laws in my books.
Oh, I'd be so honored. And I'd be even more honored if you would kindly let me tell you what we are doing.
Absolutely. Hebrews had 4 branches of government: executive, judges, elders, and prophets.
Indeed, we have 3 branches: executive, Supreme Court, and Congress.
State House, Temple El Berit to Shechem, courts for justice.
Oh yes, we employ that structure.
No idols, no absolute monarchs.
Freedom of religion and elected president.
Initial income tax.
Well, we did avoid that for a while, but only for a while.
Food and Drug Administration, Kashrut. Department of Education, Torah. Department of Commerce, with weights and measures.
Oh yes, we developed those departments as well.
Immigration policy. Honor the stranger, but he must honor our laws.
Well, I hate to say it, that's a tough one. You think you could give us another couple 100 years on that one?
Department of Defense, relying on tribal obligation.
Yeah, an unfortunate necessity. The United States is prepared to defend itself, however.
Beginnings of representative government.
A full-fledged democracy.
1 day each week rest from work.
Yes, but only on a voluntary basis. And it's time and a half for overtime.
Seems to me you get the picture. But there is more. Thomas, you know what Torah says. That God created man in his own image, male and female?
Yes, I wrote. All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator. Ah, Moses, I should have listened more carefully to you. I should have written, all people are created equal.
And remember, the people answered, the Lord has spoken, we will do.
Governments get their just power from the consent of the governed.
Pharaoh made their lives bitter in all manner of service.
The king is an absolute tyrant.
Let my people go!
When a long train of abuse subjects a people to despotism, it is their right to form a new government.
Indeed, we are souls alike.
Of course. I took lessons from you.
Thomas, I would like to leave you with this blessing that I wrote. May God bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift his face unto you and grant you peace.
Thanks for watching. For more information, read the book and keep your eye out for the play. Meanwhile, remember Eve's quest for knowledge and have a bite.